Nathan here from MiniWargaming.com. This is going to be a video response to the comments on my last battle report. I think I'm going to start doing these more often because we always get a lot of comments, people saying rules that I did wrong. And sometimes they're right, but I'm finding that more often than not, they are wrong. So I want to address those rather than reply to each individual comment. I want to make a video here, and that way we can discuss these rules. Now, some things aren't so clear, some things need to be FAQ'd, but for the most part, the things that people were calling me out on were actually wrong. So I thought that was interesting. So what I've done is I've copied and pasted a bunch of the comments that had tried to correct what I did, and I'm going to respond to them. And some of them, like I said, are right. I did something wrong, but for the most part, I'm finding that people are interpreting the rules wrong. So we have Rutgerman, who says, actually, you can't bring 2 solar pulses. Solar pulse is an upgrade for Cryptek. It stated that you may bring any number of Cryptek harbingers, but every piece of war gear is unique. So you may not take 2 solar pulses. At least that's how I understood the rule. Now, in response to that, we have our wonderful Necron Codex, because you're right and you're wrong. They are unique, but they're unique to each royal court. And since I had 2 overlords, I had 2 royal courts. He says here, any number of Crypteks that are in a royal court can be upgraded to a single specific type of harbinger, whilst you can have any number of harbingers of a specific type. Each of the harbinger's unique war gear options, such as Solar Pulse, can only be chosen once in each royal court. So there's the answer to that. I had 2 overlords, so I had 2 royal courts. The Duke 07 said, LOL, tailoring off the bat. Knew I was fighting IG, so I didn't bring any vehicles. Also, all these cheating Necron battle reports are going to look stupid once they FAQ this mess of a codex. I love it when people call list tailoring cheating. We discussed this in the last video, what I think about list tailoring. I think that if you know what your opponent is going to be having, not necessarily model per model, but like I'm playing against Imperial Guard and he's going to be doing mechanized, this is what I'm going to do. And you know you're playing against Necrons, and this is what you do. You know you're playing against Orcs, and I would change my strategy. Not changing your strategy according to who you're playing against is a dumb strategy. So that's my response to that. Bjorn the Awesome says, you set up cover, that's a bit mean, or at least I think it is. He then said a bunch of other things. Ironically, I thought the cover was against me. After I set it all up, and I realized I was going to be foot slugging across the middle of the board, and then I realized I had no terrain in the middle of the board, I was like, shoot! My Scarab Swarms have no cover, and they need cover because they only have a 5+ armor save, which is going to get negated all the time. But they have stealth, so when they have cover, they get +1 to their cover save, so they get like a 3+ cover save. So I made up for that by moving my Lich Guard, who have the dispersion shields, which gives them a 4+ invulnerable. So essentially, they're moving cover. So I kind of spread them out, moved them up, and then I put the Scarab Swarms behind them, and they got the cover saves. But still, it worked against me because I was more limited to where I could go. So, ironically, they said that I set up the cover that's mean against the Imperial Guard, but I found it was actually the opposite. Mad Bird Valiant said, Matt, for future reference, Vendettas are transports. They are literally Valkyries with 3 twin-link glass cannons. I did not know that. I think my opponent actually said they weren't transports, which is where I got that idea, but I don't remember. So, there's something I said wrong. Now, he didn't use them as transports anyway, so it didn't matter. Treyfan, I've only seen one problem so far. The Catacomb Command Barge actually has to pass over a unit for the embarked character to be able to attack it. That I agree with. And so what I had done is, let's say this is the Rhino, and the Command Barge had basically gone like this. So he passed over it just a bit and then ended right here. So remember that you don't have to go in a straight line. You could, like if I was 12 inches away, I could go 24 inches in total, go up 12 and come back 12, and that's passing over it. And so in this case, I just passed over it a bit and then I came back. So it was less than 24 inches away, so I went over it and then I came back. So it looks like I just went up to it, but I actually went over and came back. So that one I could see is a little deceiving. Cobalt 138, why can Matt bring a Lord and a Cryptek and 1 squad of warriors? Now this might get FAQ'd, but it's because, once again, there's 2 royal courts. And the wording, what it says for joining the royal court, guys, to a squad, just for those of you who aren't familiar, a royal court is 0 to 5 Necron Lords and 0 to 5 Crypteks, and they're a unit. But at the beginning of the game, you can split them off and have them join other units of Warriors, Immortals, Lich Guard, and Deathmarks. But you can't have more than 1 from the same royal court. It says, before the battle, each member of the royal court, so that specific royal court, has the option of being split off. Only 1 member of the royal court, not any royal court, but the royal court, can join each unit in this manner. So basically, the rule interpretation there is if you have 2 royal courts, in this Royal Court, you can't have two guys join the same squad, but you could have one of this one join a squad and then one of this one join a squad. So that might get FAQ'd, but right now it says the Royal Court, referring to the Royal Court that you're looking at, not any Royal Court. So that's pretty clear. Maybe it'll be FAQ'd because they'll realize they made a mistake in their wording. But it didn't seem overpowered because in order to do that, you have to bring 2 overlords. And overlords are like 1 to 200 points, depending on their upgrades. And so it's a 2,000 point game, so that's a lot there. But I could see if that did get FAQ'd. But right now the rules are in my favor. Grieva_ethereal games says your overlord killing those heavy weapon bases would have nabbed you 3 wounds, not 5. An instant death only counts as 1 point for combat resolution. It prevents you from ever getting more points than your number of attacks would allow. See, this one's curious, and I'm not making fun of this person, Grieva, but I don't know why you would say something with such authority when in the rule book it's quite the opposite. Because you gave the wording that says this is to prevent you from ever getting more points than your number of attacks. Where does it ever say that in the rule book, that we never want to be able to do that? And in fact, when we look at determining assault results on page 39, it says, note that wounds that have been negated by saves, etc., etc., only the wounds actually suffered by enemy models, including all of the wounds lost by models that have suffered instant death. In rare cases, certain models can cause wounds on themselves or their friends. Obviously, these wounds are added to the other side's total for working out who had won. One of those rare cases would be the Mind Shackle Scarabs, but we're not talking about that. So, only the wounds actually suffered by enemy models, including all the wounds lost by models that have suffered instant death, count towards combat resolution. So, page 39. So I don't know where you got the idea that you're never supposed to get more wounds in combat resolution than you have attacks, because nowhere does it even say that. So that's something that you've come up with, and then you've done it so often that you think that it's the right way. So you got to be careful that you got to review the rule book to make sure you're doing things right. I find that it's most useful, especially when you're starting a game, is you read the rule book and then you start playing, and then you go back and read the rule book a few more times, because as you play, you might start forming thoughts as to ways things should work, and then you get confused as to what you had thought the way would be, and then what the rule book actually is. And so I find that playing and then going back and reading the rule book, and then playing and going back and reading the rule book, you really get to know the rules, because things will jump out at you. You're like, oh, I had done that wrong. I didn't realize that. And then you remember that because you remember that feeling of, oh, yeah, I did that wrong. I got to remember to do it properly. So study your rule book. Templar Storm says, it is a little confusing and it's worded dumb, but I believe you are playing Entropic Touch wrong. That one's worded fun. The reduced armor from a scarab doesn't take effect until the next initiative level. You don't get to lower the armor, then attack the lower armor all with the same model in the same turn. I disagree with that, because it's all order of operations here. Entropic Touch. Entropic Strike, the Necron rulebook. For each hit a vehicle suffers from a weapon or model with this special rule, roll d6. For each result of 4+, it immediately loses 1 point of armor value from all facings. So for each hit, so this is, assuming that they're thinking about this the right way, and it's not going to get FAQ'd, which of course can change rules in the rule book. For each hit, so once you hit, you roll a die, and on a 4+, it immediately loses 1 point. So we have interpreted that, and I think it's pretty straightforward, that you hit, then you lower armor, and then you roll for penetration. Now where it gets a little confusing is the Lich Guard and the Scarab Swarms were in the same fight, and they're all at the same initiative. And so this one is kind of up in the air, because what I did is I chose to have the Scarab Swarms go first, even though their initiative is the same. And so they would strike, lower the armor, and then deal the damage, and then the Lich Guard would attack. So I could see if that was incorrect, but it's kind of hard because of the same initiative. So they're all striking at the same time. But if you really look at it as all the same time, then they all strike at the same time. The Entropic Touch takes effect, and then they all roll to penetrate at the same time. So you could have it arguably work both ways. But for sure, with the current way the rules are written, you roll to hit, and every hit you then roll to lower the armor, and then you roll for armor penetration. That is for sure. You can't really misinterpret the rules. You can't think, well, that's not what they intended. Who cares what they intended? Let's take a look at what they wrote. And yes, rules as written supersedes rules as intended until an FAQ comes out, for the most part. Olinsir says, right at the start, that squad could not regroup. There was an enemy within 6 inches. They should have been off the board. That is correct. There was an Imperial Guard and the Overlord fighting, and there was a squad of the heavy weapon team that regrouped and came in, but they died in the end anyway, so that was okay. But that is correct. They should not have regrouped. Tree fan. Cryptek has Ever Living. It ignores this associated unit when rolling for reanimation protocols. Even if all the Lich Guard are eliminated, it, just like the Lords and Overlords, will still have a chance of standing back up. That one, we made a house ruling on that because that one actually is not clear in the rule book. Our house rule is that Ever Living only works all the time if you're an independent character, so Overlords and special characters always get Ever Living rolls no matter what happens. But Lords and Crypteks only get it if their squad is still alive. And if you look at the wording in the rule book, you can kind of see how that would be interpreted that way, because it says they must join the squad that they're part of, otherwise they do not come back. So that one's debatable, and then we're not going to really debate that here because that one definitely needs an FAQ. Polaris 3000 says, wow, Imperial Guard Matt needs to brush up on his night fighting rules. Ordnance and barrage weapons can still fire even if they fail to see the target unit. They just scatter 3d6 if they do not roll a hit. That is incorrect. Only barrage weapons can fire in the dark. Ordnance cannot. So once again, read a little closer in the rule book under that. In night fighting, if you don't see your target, then it's like the target was out of line of sight. Ordnance weapons cannot fire at something out of line of sight. Barrage weapons can. And then you're right that they do scatter 3d6. Scary Mushroom says, I have some feedback concerning your reanimation protocol's point tracker. So this is actually the final comment. So this one's not so much a rules question. But this is the point tracker that I have that says, how many Necrons came back and how many points. I believe, at least, I sincerely hope, that the game designers factored reanimation protocols into the points cost of the model. I agree. Certainly when a model with a resurrection orb comes back because of a resurrection orb, the orb is saving points that were spent on making itself more likely to come back. This doesn't represent the model's total fighting ability. Anyway, my point is that it's a bit misleading to say that X points came back, because X points won't be able to do X points worth of work unless they get back up again later. It's especially misleading to say that about an expensive model, like a tooled out Cryptek or an Overlord. If they get up 3 times, and have you earned 600 points, or have you been really lucky with your 200 point model? I agree. I don't think that the reanimation counter is like this. There's nothing scientific about it. It's just more for fun. That say, hey, this is how many points got to stand back up. I do agree that part of the points cost of the model would be in the fact that they have a 4+ will be back, or reanimation protocol with a resurrection orb nearby. And also with an Overlord, when he stands back up, he only has 1 of his 3 wounds, so should I only count 33%? But even at 1 wound, he still is at full strength. He still gets to do all of his attacks and everything. So I agree. There's no real reason for the reanimation protocol counter other than just kind of like, oh, that's interesting that many points came back. We could also have counters for armor saves. Like, how many armor saves did you make? How many points of models of armor saves did you make? Because it's essentially the same idea. Or heck, just how many hits did you make? There's a lot of different things we could count, but I thought the Necron reanimation protocol counter was an obvious one. Now, I should have mentioned this at the beginning of the video because most people won't be here by this point, but this video is made shortly after the battle report was posted on Mini Wargaming. So if you're on YouTube, then what you should do if you want to, I'm going to start doing these more, if you want to be included in this and you think we did a rule wrong, you need to write that comment on the battle report on the Mini Wargaming site within a day after the battle report comes out, because I make this video a day after. So if you want to be part of this discussion, then go on to Mini Wargaming site, and whenever we put up a new battle report, watch it within the first 24 hours, and then you can reply to the comments there, or put a comment there of anything that you thought we did wrong. I'm very open to the idea of you guys telling me what you think I did wrong, because sometimes you're right and I learned something new. But as time is going on and I'm getting better and better at the rules, less and less it's wrong, and more times other people are interpreting the rules incorrectly. So it still makes an interesting discussion though. So leave your comments below, what rules you think I did wrong, what interpretations I just said that you disagree with. That's perfectly fine. It's rules. They can be interpreted one way or another to our whims and to what we want them to do. And I will see you in the next video when we have more battle reports. Happy wargaming.